So when you think about human trafficking, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably something straight out of a movie, right? A traumatic kidnapping, a stranger in a van. But what if I told you that almost everything we think we know about this crime is, well, wrong? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that Hollywood myth and take a hard look at what human trafficking really is, how it actually works, and what we can do to fight it.
All right, let's dive right in. First things first, we've got to deconstruct these big misconceptions. To really get our heads around the problem, we need to start with the facts, with the actual legal foundation, not with a movie script. And this is the biggest myth of all, that trafficking is always a violent kidnapping. The reality? It's way more subtle and, frankly, a lot more insidious. See, it's not really about snatching people off the street. It's about a systematic process of breaking down a person's will, using this trio of tools: force, fraud, and coercion.
And if you need a number to really drive that point home, get this. In the United States, kidnapping is a factor in less than 0.5% of trafficking cases. Just think about that. That one statistic forces us to completely rethink what this crime looks like and what we should even be looking for.
So if it's not kidnapping, what is it? Well, the official definition, which comes from the UN's Palermo Protocol, breaks it down into 3 key parts: the act, the means, and the purpose. The act is just the moving or holding of a person. The purpose, that's the end goal, exploitation. But the absolute key here is the means, the tools of control, threats, deception, coercion. And here's the kicker. If any of those means are used, it doesn't matter one bit if the person originally said yes. That consent is legally meaningless.
Now, these ideas aren't just theoretical, they're written into law. Think of it like this. The UN's Palermo Protocol is the global blueprint. It sets a standard definition so that every country is playing by the same rules. And then, here in the United States, we have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVPA. This is the domestic toolkit. It created what's known as the 3P framework: prosecution, protection, and prevention, and also established critical support systems like the T-visa, which gives survivors a way to stay in the country and help bring their traffickers to justice. Okay, so if it isn't always physical chains in a locked room, what are the real mechanics of control? Let's get into how traffickers actually manage to trap and hold people, often right out in the open.
This quote right here, it absolutely nails it. Trafficking isn't just a crime against someone's body. It's a crime against their free will, their agency. The entire goal is to build a psychological prison that's often far more effective than any physical one could ever be.
And traffickers have a whole playbook to do it. They use legal abuse, like taking passports or threatening to call immigration. They use psychological manipulation, isolating people and tearing down their self-worth to make them dependent. This can even lead to something called trauma bonding, where a victim, as a survival tactic, actually develops a sense of loyalty to their abuser. More and more, traffickers are also using drug addiction as a tool of control. And of course, there's debt bondage, piling on fake debts for food, rent, or transport that spiral so quickly they become impossible to ever pay back.
So the really crucial thing to understand here is that violence is not always the first move. Deception is the entry point. A trafficker's most common weapon isn't a fist or a gun, it's a lie, especially when it comes to luring people into forced labor. And what do those lies look like? Well, it could be the promise of a great job on a farm or in a hotel. It could be an offer of marriage that's really just a trap. Or it could be a contract that promises certain wages and decent conditions, but the second the victim arrives, alone and already in debt, the whole story changes.
So we've got the how, but what about the how many? What's the real scale of this problem? This is incredibly hard to measure, because this is a crime that thrives in the shadows. But researchers have found ways to build models that give us a pretty chilling look at the reality.
This chart shows the challenge perfectly. That small bar, that's the number of victims we actually identify, the ones who call a hotline or are found in a police raid. But that big bar, that's what's called the dark figure. That's the estimate of how many people are really out there. For every single person we find, there are so many more we never see. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
So what is that estimated total, the number that accounts for the whole iceberg? Globally, it's 27.6 million people. That's how many men, women, and children are trapped in forced labor or forced sexual exploitation on any given day.
And why does this crime exist on such a massive scale? You probably guessed it: money. It is astronomically profitable. Human trafficking generates an estimated $236 billion in illegal profits every single year. It's one of the largest criminal businesses on the entire planet.
Let's bring that huge number down to a more human level. In developed countries, the average trafficker makes about $21,800 in profit per victim per year. This isn't just a violation of human rights. It's a massive, market-driven industry that runs on human misery. Now, here's another number that might just surprise you. While the media tends to focus almost entirely on sex trafficking, that's actually not the biggest piece of the pie. Labor trafficking is the invisible majority, making up over 3/4 of all victims worldwide. This is happening in industries we all rely on every day: agriculture, construction, hotels, domestic work. It's happening right under our noses.
So, when you're faced with a problem this huge, this complex, where do you even begin to find a solution? Well, the whole conversation is starting to shift, away from just rescue and toward building a new, more effective strategy.
And that leads us to this really critical question. Is it enough to just keep pulling people out of the river one by one? Or at some point, do we have to go upstream and figure out why they're falling in the first place? Let's take corporate supply chains as an example. For years, the approach was something called a corporate social audit. A big brand would pay inspectors to go check on their suppliers. But that model is full of holes. It's way too easy to fake the paperwork and hide abused workers. The new gold standard is a totally different model called worker-driven social responsibility, or WSR. So how does this work? Basically, it flips the whole system on its head. Instead of a top-down inspection, it's all about bottom-up empowerment. It starts with the workers themselves helping to write the rules. Then you get legally binding agreements with the big companies that buy the products. And most importantly, you create safe, anonymous ways for workers to report problems, which triggers real, immediate economic consequences for any supplier that breaks the rules.
Which really brings us to the final and most important idea. The real long-term solution means we have to move past the dramatic rescue fantasies. It means we have to tackle the root causes, the poverty, the legal loopholes, the broken systems, the lack of transparency in our supply chains, all the things that make people vulnerable to traffickers to begin with. The ultimate question isn't just about how we save victims. It's about how we create a world where they can't be created in the first place.